They called it a ghost in the sky. American radar operators swore they saw nothing, not a blip, not a shadow, and yet, moments later, airfields erupted in flames. It was as if Japan had found a way to make its bombers disappear. But this wasn't magic. It was something far more terrifying, a secret so strange that even Allied scientists couldn't believe it was real. This is the story of the bomber that vanished from radar, until it was far too late. The year was 1944. The Pacific skies were a chessboard of death. Radar was the Allies' greatest weapon. It could spot metal planes hundreds of miles away, giving soldiers precious minutes to scramble defenses. But then, something began to break that pattern. One by one, American radar stations across the Philippines started reporting strange anomalies, planes that appeared out of nowhere. No blip on the screens, no warning sirens, just the sudden roar of engines overhead and the thunder of explosions below. At first, commanders thought it was a radar malfunction. They sent engineers to check every wire, every circuit. Nothing. The machines were fine. So, how were Japanese bombers slipping through unseen? Then came an intercepted Japanese transmission, fragments of coded words that made no sense. Wooden thunder, the invisible ones. The Americans dismissed it as nonsense, but somewhere deep in Japan's military labs, engineers were already building what they called planes that ghosts could fly. They weren't made of aluminum. They weren't made for survival. They were made for a single purpose, to die unseen. And soon, one of those planes would vanish from the skies over Okinawa and change radar warfare forever. Hidden deep within a Nakajima aircraft plant outside Tokyo, a new kind of bomber was taking shape, one that broke every rule of modern aviation. The engineers called it the Ki-115 Tsurugi, the Sword, but among pilots it earned another name, the Ghost Plane. It wasn't sleek or beautiful. It was crude. A body built mostly of wood and bamboo, with just enough metal to hold the engine in place. There was no armor, no radio, no chance of returning home. The idea was chillingly simple. If it wasn't metal, radar couldn't see it. Japanese scientists had discovered that Allied radar waves bounced off metallic objects. But wood? Wood could pass right through undetected. So the Japanese Imperial Army gave the order, build as many as possible, and build them fast. Each Ki-115 was a one-way weapon. The pilot's seat was thin plywood, and the cockpit was stripped bare. No gauges, no parachute. A single massive bomb sat beneath the fuselage, wired directly to the engine. The moment the pilot released it, or crashed into the target, it would detonate. And yet, hundreds of young men volunteered. They knew they wouldn't come back. But to them, this wasn't suicide. It was sacrifice. American radar teams began reporting phantom attacks. Bases were hit without warning. Fuel depots exploded, without a trace of incoming aircraft, and Allied analysts were left staring at blank screens, unable to understand how. They called them wooden devils, but for Japan, it was their last desperate whisper in a war they were already losing. At first, the Americans didn't believe it. How can a plane just vanish? One radar operator shouted as explosions echoed across a Pacific airfield. The screen showed nothing. No blips, no warnings, no sign of approach. Just silence and then destruction. It was chaos. Air bases in the Philippines, on Saipan, even Okinawa were hit by invisible attackers. Anti-air gunners fired wildly into empty skies. Pilots scrambled to intercept, but by the time they spotted the incoming Ki-115s, it was already too late. The wooden bombers came in low, hugging the waves, engines roaring like dying beasts. They carried a single, massive explosive charge, often up to 800 kilograms. When they hit, the ground shook for miles. Captured fragments revealed the horrifying truth. These weren't just planes. They were flying coffins. Each cockpit held the charred remains of a pilot who had no means of escape. The engineers had deliberately left out landing gear to discourage any thoughts of return. What made it worse was how cheap they were to build. While America poured resources into steel and aluminum aircraft, Japan's factories, bombed and starving for materials, turned to whatever they could find: bamboo, scrap wood, even paper layers soaked in oil, anything that could fly once. And in the confusion of radar failure, these ghost planes managed to hit fuel convoys, supply depots, and even aircraft carriers. The psychological damage was immense. Allied crews began to fear the silence itself. Every night, radar stations stayed alert for the hum of an engine they couldn't see. Every blank screen became a nightmare. The Americans needed answers, and fast. By late 1945, U.S. intelligence finally pieced it together. An intercepted Japanese transmission mentioned something called the Tsurugi Project. It described experimental wooden bombers, crude, unstable, and built only for one thing: to disappear from radar until the very last second. When the Americans recovered wreckage from a downed Ki-115 near Okinawa, it confirmed their fears. The aircraft was barely more than a skeleton. No armor, no radio, not even retractable landing gear. Its frame was coated in a strange resin that reduced reflection from radar waves. Ingenious, terrifying, and utterly desperate. Inside, they found something that chilled every engineer who touched it: a personal note from one of the pilots. Written in shaky ink, it read, "For the Emperor, for my mother, for the wind that will carry my fire." That was the moment it sank in. These weren't just planes. They were human sacrifices hidden behind wooden wings. The discovery changed everything. The Allies immediately began re-engineering radar frequencies to detect low reflective materials, the earliest step toward what would one day become stealth technology. Ironically, Japan's act of desperation had pushed the world decades ahead in military innovation. When the war ended, many of these ghost planes were found abandoned in hidden hangars, unfinished, forgotten, gathering dust like tombs of an empire that had burned itself to the edge of extinction. Even today, historians look at those fragile wooden frames and wonder, what drove men to trade metal for wood, hope for ashes, and life for one final impact? It was more than a war. It was faith turned into flame. If this story gave you chills, imagine how many others still lie buried in the ashes of history. Don't miss them. Subscribe to the channel for more forgotten secret of the war. And if you felt the weight of this one, leave a comment below. Would you have flown the wooden bomber knowing it wouldn't bring you back?